Malcolm Washington stares at the fleet of grounded planes from his office window. 47 aircraft, 17,000 stranded passengers, and a company losing millions by the minute. All because 2 gate agents wouldn't let his daughters board. Sometimes he whispers lessons cost everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about people standing up against discrimination. This family's flight was about to take off, but what happened next changed everything for an entire airline. The Washington family's day began like any other important business trip. Malcolm Washington, the brilliant 42-year-old CEO of Genesis Technologies, a Fortune 500 tech company known for innovative software solutions, was preparing for his investor meeting in New York. His meticulous attention to detail had earned him a reputation as one of the most successful Black executives in America. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he called out to his daughters, "Zoe, Jasmine, we need to leave in 20 minutes." His 16-year-old twin daughters were busy finalizing their own preparations. As top students at Westlake Preparatory Academy, they were beginning their college visits with Columbia University being their first stop. Jasmine, the more analytical of the twins, was carefully packing her presentation materials for the student research competition she'd been invited to participate in. "Dad, do you think I should bring the physical prototype or just the digital renderings?" Jasmine asked, holding up her environmental monitoring device that had won the state science fair. "Bring both. Columbia's engineering department will want to see the hardware," Malcolm replied, checking his watch. Across the hall, Zoe was having a minor fashion crisis. Unlike her sister's scientific precision, Zoe's strengths leaned toward humanities and social sciences. She held up 2 blazers, analyzing each with critical eyes. "I'm freaking out about these interviews," Zoe admitted, when her father appeared in her doorway. "What if they don't think I'm Columbia material?" Malcolm crossed the room and put his hands on his daughter's shoulders. "You're brilliant, articulate, and have a perfect academic record. Just be yourself." "You know it's not that simple for us," Zoe replied, her voice quieter. Malcolm nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind her words. "I know. That's why your mother and I have always told you. We have to work twice as hard to get half as far," both twins recited in unison from different rooms, having heard this mantra their entire lives. Naomi Washington, Malcolm's wife and the twins' mother, entered the conversation as she fastened her gold earrings. At 40, the accomplished neurosurgeon at Mercy Hospital balanced her demanding career with family life with the same precision she applied to her operations. "It's not fair, but it's reality," Naomi said, her voice gentle but firm. "But remember what else we taught you. Never let anyone define your worth," Jasmine called from her room. "And always maintain your dignity, even when others lose theirs," Zoe finished. Malcolm's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Darren. "Your Skyline Airlines first-class tickets are confirmed. Car service arrives in 30 minutes. The family continued their morning routine, a dance they had perfected over years. As Malcolm helped load the luggage into Naomi's car, their neighbor, Frank Palmer, waved from across the street. His smile visibly tightened when Malcolm waved back. 5 years in this neighborhood and he still looks surprised to see us here," Malcolm muttered. Imagine his face when Jasmine won the science scholarship his son was counting on. Naomi replied with a small smile. "Some people will never adjust to seeing Black excellence up close." As they finished loading the car, Malcolm's phone rang. It was the hospital calling Naomi in for an emergency surgery. "I can drop the girls at the airport, but I won't be able to see them off," Naomi said, after hanging up, disappointment clear in her voice. "It's okay, Mom. Your patient needs you more," Jasmine reassured her. "We'll be fine," Zoe added. "Dad will be on the same flight anyway." Malcolm nodded. "I'll wrap up my meeting and meet them at the gate. They're old enough to navigate the airport." Before they departed, Malcolm gathered his family in a brief huddle, their tradition before important events. "Remember who you are and whose you are. he said the family motto, passing between them like a treasured heirloom. None of them could have predicted how significant those words would become in the next few hours. Chicago O'Hare International Airport bustled with the controlled chaos typical of a Friday afternoon. Naomi pulled up to the departures curb, quickly helping the twins with their luggage. "Text me when you land," she said, giving each daughter a tight hug. "And good luck with your Columbia visit. I'm so proud of you both." After one last embrace, Naomi reluctantly returned to her car, already mentally preparing for the emergency surgery awaiting her. Zoe and Jasmine entered the terminal, pulling their carry-on suitcases behind them. Even in the diverse crowd of travelers, they couldn't help noticing the subtle glances cast their way sideways. Looks double takes, and whispers behind hands. 3 o'clock. Woman in the blue pantsuit, Jasmine murmured to her sister, using their code for noticing someone watching them. "She's been staring since we walked in." Zoe sighed. "Maybe she's just admiring your fantastic shoes." "Right, because that's always it," Jasmine replied with a wry smile. As they navigated toward the Skyline check-in counters, an older black janitor pushing a cleaning cart did a double take as they passed. "Excuse me," he called, his face lighting up with recognition. "You're Malcolm Washington's daughters, aren't you? I recognized you from that Fortune magazine spread last month." The twins smiled, politely accustomed to their father's occasional recognition. "Your daddy's doing big things," the janitor continued proudly. "My grandson applied for that scholarship program his company started. Having someone like him in those boardrooms makes a difference for all of us." "Thank you, sir. We'll tell him you said so," Jasmine replied warmly. The janitor nodded and continued on his way, leaving the girls with genuine smiles as they approached the first-class check-in counter. The attendant, Patricia Coleman, according to her nameplate, looked up at them with an expression that quickly shifted from professional courtesy to thinly veiled suspicion. "Can I help you?" Patricia asked, her tone suggesting they might be at the wrong counter. "We're checking in for the 315 flight to New York," Zoe explained, sliding their IDs and boarding passes across the counter. Patricia examined their documentation, her eyebrows raising slightly. "First class, both of you." "Yes," Jasmine confirmed, maintaining the polite but firm tone their parents had taught them. "Our father is a Skyline preferred member." Patricia typed into her computer, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll need to see additional identification." The twins exchanged a glance, noting that the white businessman who had checked in moments earlier hadn't been asked for secondary ID. "Is there a problem with our tickets?" Zoe asked calmly. "Just standard procedure for unaccompanied minors in premium cabins," Patricia replied, though her eyes didn't meet theirs. "We're 16, not 12. Jasmine pointed out, retrieving her student ID as additional proof. After several more minutes of verification, Patricia reluctantly tagged their luggage with first-class priority labels and directed them to security. "That was fun," Zoe muttered as they walked away. "Wonder what's waiting for us at the gate." Security proved to be another exercise in patience. While most passengers moved through the TSA checkpoint efficiently, Jasmine was pulled aside for a random search of her carry-on, which contained her science project materials. "What's this device?" the agent asked, suspiciously pointing to her environmental monitor. "It's a particulate matter sensor for my research project. I'm presenting it at Columbia University," Jasmine explained, maintaining her composure despite her rising frustration. After a supervisor was called to examine the harmless science equipment, they were finally allowed to proceed to their gate, where they found 2 agents preparing for boarding. The male agent, whose nameplate read Brett Holloway, was a stern-faced man in his 50s with thinning hair and permanently furrowed brows. His colleague, Veronica Winters, appeared to be in her 30s and occasionally glanced at Brett with what seemed like unease. As the twins took seats near the gate, they observed the agent's interactions with various passengers. Brett seemed to select certain travelers for additional questioning about carry-on sizes or boarding passes, a pattern that didn't escape Jasmine's notice. Third, Random check of a passenger of color, she whispered to Zoe, after Brett directed a middle-aged Asian woman to verify her carry-on dimensions in the sizing box, while white passengers with similarly sized bags boarded without comment. The twins overheard Brett murmuring to Veronica as he shuffled through boarding passes. These people always try to bring everything but the kitchen sink on board. Veronica's uncomfortable smile and quick change of subject suggested she recognized the inappropriate nature of his comment, but wasn't willing to challenge him. When first-class boarding was announced, the twins gathered their belongings and approached the gate, boarding passes and IDs ready. Their father had texted that he was already on board, having arrived from his earlier meeting. As they stepped toward the gate, Brett Holloway's gaze fell upon them, his expression hardening in a way that made both girls instinctively brace themselves. What they didn't realize was that this moment, this seemingly routine interaction at Gate B-17, was about to change the trajectory of numerous lives and an entire corporation. First-class passengers and Skyline Elite members may now board. The announcement echoed through the gate area as Zoe and Jasmine Washington approached the boarding lane designated for premium passengers. Several business travelers in suits moved forward, scanning their boarding passes without incident, as Brett Holloway and Veronica Winters processed them with efficiency and professional smiles. When the twins reached the front of the line, Brett's demeanor shifted noticeably. "Boarding passes and ID, please," he said, his tone markedly different from the cordial greeting he'd offered previous passengers. Jasmine handed over both their documents. "We're traveling to New York." Brett examined their boarding passes with exaggerated scrutiny, turning them over and holding them up to the light as if checking for counterfeiting. "These look irregular," he stated, despite the fact that the digital scanner had verified them with a confirming beep. "Irregular how?" Zoe asked, maintaining the calm politeness her parents had instilled in her. "We checked in without any issues." Brett ignored her question, instead asking, "Are you sure you're at the right gate? This is first-class boarding." "Yes, we're aware," Jasmine replied, pointing to their boarding passes that clearly showed first-class seat assignments. "Our father is already on board." Veronica glanced at her computer screen. "The tickets are valid in the system, Brett." Brett shot her a look that immediately silenced her. "There's a policy about unaccompanied minors in first class. You'll need a letter of permission from a parent or guardian." This was a fabrication, and both girls knew it. They had flown Skyline numerous times with their parents and occasionally alone. "That's not an actual policy," Jasmine stated firmly. "We've flown Skyline before without any such requirement." "Well, it's my policy," Brett retorted, his voice hardening. "Security protocols have tightened." As they were speaking, a white teenage boy approximately their age approached the priority lane. Brett scanned his boarding pass with a smile. "Enjoy your flight, sir," he said, ushering him through without requesting ID or parental permission. The contrast was so blatant that even Veronica appeared uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with the twins. Jasmine discreetly removed her phone from her pocket and began recording the interaction. "Our father, Malcolm Washington, is already on the plane," Zoe explained again, maintaining her composure despite growing frustration. "You can verify that with the flight attendants." "I'm not calling the aircraft for something like this," Brett dismissed. "If your father is really on board, he should have escorted you himself. He had an earlier meeting and boarded during the pre-boarding call." Jasmine explained, "We have the same last name on our IDs. You can see we're family." Brett's expression darkened when he noticed Jasmine recording. "Put that phone away right now or I'll call security. You're causing a scene." Several nearby passengers watched the interaction with discomfort, but none intervened. An older white woman frowned disapprovingly, but it wasn't clear whether her disapproval was directed at the girls or the gate agent. "Final boarding call for Skyline Flight 1857 to New York," the announcement system declared. "We need to board now," Zoe urged, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Our father is expecting us." "I'm sorry, but without proper verification, I can't allow you to board." Brett declared, with finality confiscating their boarding passes. "These will need to be verified by a supervisor." "You just let that boy our age board without any verification," Jasmine pointed out, still recording. "That's different." Brett snapped, then realizing his mistake, added, "His situation was already verified." Veronica, looking increasingly uncomfortable, whispered something to Brett that the twins couldn't hear. "If you don't step aside for other passengers, I'll have no choice but to call security," Brett threatened, gesturing to two TSA officers standing nearby. The girls stepped to the side, immediately calling their father. "Dad, they won't let us board Zoe," explained rapidly. "The gate agent took our boarding passes and is saying we need some kind of letter." As the final passengers were boarding, Brett declared their boarding passes unverified and signaled to the TSA officers, who began walking toward the increasingly distressed teenagers. What none of them realized was that Malcolm Washington had just received the video clip Jasmine had managed to send before her phone was demanded to be put away, and he was about to respond in a way that would reverberate throughout the entire airline industry. Malcolm Washington sat in seat 2, reviewing quarterly projections with two key investors who had joined him for the early boarding. His custom-designed Genesis Technologies tablet displayed promising growth charts when the notification banner slid across the top of his screen. "Emergency. Zoe and Jasmine cannot board." He dismissed it initially, focusing on the potential 8-figure investment being discussed. Venture capitalist Regina Owens was asking about market penetration strategies when a second notification appeared. "Video attachment. Urgent." "Excuse me one moment," Malcolm said, professionally opening the message with growing concern. The 15-second clip showed his daughters being denied boarding while a white teen passed through unquestioned. The audio captured Brett Holloway's dismissive tone and thinly veiled hostility. Malcolm's expression remained neutral, a skill perfected over decades of being the only black executive in countless rooms. But his grip on the tablet tightened until his knuckles strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for departure. Please ensure all electronic devices are in airplane mode," announced the flight attendant moving through the cabin. Malcolm looked up, his decision already made. "I apologize, but I need to deplane immediately. Family emergency." Regina's eyebrow raised. "Everything all right, Malcolm?" "No," he replied, simply gathering his belongings with deliberate calm. "But it will be." As Malcolm stood, flight attendant Heather Brooks approached with a practiced smile. "Sir, we're about to close the door. I'll need you to take your seat." "My daughters are being prevented from boarding," Malcolm explained, his voice controlled but firm. "I need to deplane now." "I understand your concern, sir. But once the door closes..." "My daughters are 16 years old and being harassed by your gate agent," Malcolm interrupted, abandoning his usual diplomatic approach. "Either open the door or I'll activate the emergency protocols as a major shareholder of your parent company." The mention of his shareholder status changed Heather's expression instantly. She stepped aside, radioing the captain about the situation. As Malcolm moved toward the exit, the internal battle raged within him. For 20 years, he'd navigated corporate America by following the unwritten rules for black success: work harder, speak softer, never show anger, pick your battles carefully. He'd built his reputation on being reasonable and measured. But watching his daughters, honor students with bright futures, being treated like suspicious characters triggered something primal and unstoppable. The carefully constructed professional persona began cracking under the weight of parental instinct. The jetway door reopened, and Malcolm strode toward the gate with purpose, his 6'2" frame moving with controlled urgency. Through the terminal windows, he could see his daughters surrounded by security personnel, while Brett gesticulated with exaggerated authority. "Is this really happening in 2025? Malcolm thought as he approached the confrontation, hearing Brett's condescending tone before seeing his face. "Young ladies without proper verification? "You're creating a security issue," Brett was saying as Malcolm approached. "The only security issue here is your blatant discrimination," Malcolm stated, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Brett turned, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. "Sir, this is an official airport matter. Please step back." The security officers looked uncertainly between Brett and the imposing new arrival. "Dad, both girls," exclaimed with visible relief. Brett's expression flickered with confusion, then dismissal. "You're claiming to be their father. I'll need to see identification and proof of relationship." Malcolm fixed Brett with an unwavering stare. "My name is Malcolm Washington. My daughters and I have valid first-class tickets on this flight, which you've chosen to deny them, for reasons you and I both know have nothing to do with security." Brett's demeanor shifted slightly, but he doubled down. "I'm simply following protocol for unaccompanied minors." "A protocol you selectively enforce," Malcolm replied, nodding toward Jasmine's phone, which still showed the white teenager boarding unchallenged. "Different circumstances," Brett stammered, increasingly uncomfortable. "Identical circumstances, different treatment," Malcolm countered, then addressed the security officers. "I'd like your names and badge numbers, as I'll be filing a formal complaint regarding this incident." Brett's confidence wavered as he began realizing he might have made a mistake. "There's no need to escalate this. If you're their father, we can resolve this." "It's already escalated," Malcolm replied. "I want to speak with your supervisor immediately." "I am the supervisor on duty," Brett claimed, his chest puffing slightly. "Then, I need your manager," Malcolm insisted, pulling out his phone and opening the Skyline Airlines executive contact list that most passengers wouldn't have access to. Brett's eyes widened as he glimpsed the internal company directory. "Are you Malcolm Washington, CEO of Genesis Technologies and board member of Transcendent Holdings, which owns 22% of your parent company?" Malcolm confirmed, his voice steady. "Now, who is the highest-ranking Skyline official currently in this airport?" Veronica, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm, picked up a phone. "I'll call Airport Manager Pierce right away." Brett's face drained of color as the implications sank in. "Mr. Washington, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Your daughters can board immediately." "That opportunity passed when you threatened them with security," Malcolm replied. "We'll wait for your manager." Within minutes, Airport Manager Franklin Pierce arrived, immediately recognizing Malcolm from industry events. "Mr. Washington," Franklin greeted with professional concern. "I was informed of a boarding issue." Malcolm explained the situation succinctly, while Brett attempted to interject with increasingly desperate explanations about standard procedures and security protocols. Franklin turned to Brett with barely concealed anger. "We'll discuss your interpretation of company policy later." To the Washington family, he said, "Please accept my deepest apologies. We can have you on the next flight to New York in 30 minutes, all upgraded to our premium cabin." Jasmine and Zoe looked to their father, uncertain whether the ordeal was truly over. Malcolm considered the offer, weighing his options. "Girls, you can board if you want to continue to New York," Malcolm said gently, "but I'll be staying here to address this situation." The twins exchanged glances, having witnessed something rare in their father, the calculated professional veneer giving way to the protective parent. "We'll stay with you, Dad," Zoe decided. Malcolm nodded, then turned to Franklin. "I need access to your operations center and a direct line to Raymond Shaw immediately." Franklin recognized the name of Skyline's regional director. "Of course, Mr. Washington. Right this way." As they walked away, Brett called after them, "Mr. Washington, I truly apologize for any inconvenience. I was just following." Malcolm stopped and turned. "Save it. Your apology isn't to me. It's to my daughters and the countless others who've endured your standard procedures without the resources to fight back. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to do anything about it? Or have you been in Malcolm's shoes, having to choose between staying quiet or taking a stand?" Comment number 1 if you believe Malcolm should pursue this issue all the way to the top, or number 2, if you think he should accept the apology and move on with his trip. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories about people standing up against injustice in powerful ways. Do you think Malcolm is about to make a career-ending move, or is he about to change an entire company's culture? Let's find out what happens next. The Skyline Airlines Operations Center hummed with activity as Malcolm Washington followed Franklin Pierce through its sliding glass doors. Dozens of screens displayed flight paths, weather patterns, and real-time aircraft positions across the national network. Under normal circumstances, Malcolm might have appreciated the technological marvel before him, a command center orchestrating hundreds of simultaneous journeys across the skies. But these were not normal circumstances. Mr. Shaw will be here momentarily, Franklin assured, directing Malcolm and his daughters to a private conference room adjacent to the main floor. Jasmine was still documenting everything on her phone, her analytical mind processing the situation like the scientist she aspired to be. Zoe, meanwhile, observed the human elements, the curious glances from operations staff, the whispered conversations, the way Franklin's professional demeanor barely concealed his anxiety. "Dad," Zoe whispered, "what exactly are you planning to do?" Before Malcolm could answer, Raymond Shaw entered the room. The Skyline Regional Director was a polished executive in his late 50s, with silver hair and the practiced smile of someone accustomed to damage control. Malcolm Washington Raymond greeted with forced warmth, extending his hand. "I understand there was an unfortunate misunderstanding at the gate. I assure you Skyline takes customer service very seriously, especially for our premium passengers." Malcolm didn't take the offered hand. "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Raymond. It was discrimination, plain and simple." Raymond's smile faltered. "That's a serious accusation. I'm sure there was no intentional." "Let me stop you right there," Malcolm interrupted. "I'm not interested in the prepared corporate response. What happened to my daughters wasn't an isolated incident." Malcolm set his tablet on the conference table and pulled up a folder labeled Skyline Incidents. He turned the screen toward Raymond. "In the 20 minutes since this occurred, my team has compiled 17 similar complaints filed against your airline in the past year alone. 6 specifically mention Brett Holloway by name. All involve passengers of color being subjected to additional verification that white passengers mysteriously don't require." Raymond blinked clearly, not expecting this level of preparation. "Mr. Washington, while I appreciate your concerns, these incidents represent a fraction of the millions of passengers we serve annually." "One would be too many," Malcolm replied. "But more importantly, I'm not here as an angry passenger. I'm here as a major investor in your parent company." Malcolm turned to his daughters. "Girls, could you give us the room for a few minutes?" Once they stepped outside, Malcolm's tone shifted from concerned father to executive strategist. "Raymond I, sit on the board of Transcendent Holdings. We own 22% of Global Air Partners, your parent company. I'm not just a passenger you can placate with upgrade vouchers." The color drained from Raymond's face as the implications became clear. "What are you suggesting?" Raymond asked, cautiously. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm informing you of what's going to happen next," Malcolm stated flatly. "I'm exercising emergency oversight authority under Section 7.3 of our investment agreement." He swiped through his tablet to display the relevant documentation. "This gives me authority to initiate a comprehensive operational review when there's evidence of systematic issues that could impact shareholder value." Raymond stared at the clause recognition dawning in his eyes. "You can't mean..." "Effective immediately, I'm ordering a ground stop of all Skyline Airlines flights nationwide until this situation is addressed properly." "That's impossible," Raymond sputtered. "We have hundreds of aircraft in operation right now. The logistical and financial implications would be significant," Malcolm finished for him. "Yes, I'm well aware, which is why I suggest you call Gregory Bennett immediately." Raymond reached for his phone with shaking hands. "You're talking about grounding an entire airline because of one gate agent's poor judgment." "No, I'm talking about addressing a pattern of discriminatory practices that your company has repeatedly ignored," Malcolm corrected. "Brett Holloway is a symptom, not the disease." While Raymond made the call, Malcolm stepped outside to check on his daughters. "Everything okay?" he asked, finding them seated in the waiting area. "We're fine," Jasmine assured him, "just processing everything." Zoe seemed less certain. "Dad, are you sure about this? This seems extreme." Malcolm sat between his daughters, lowering his voice. "Sometimes, sweetheart, the only way to create real change is to make it financially impossible to continue with the status quo." "But grounding an entire airline," Jasmine questioned. "Won't this affect thousands of people?" "Yes," Malcolm acknowledged. "And that's precisely why it will work. When discrimination only impacts a few, it's easily ignored. When it disrupts everyone, it becomes everyone's problem." Inside the conference room, Raymond was engaged in an increasingly heated conversation with Skyline CEO Gregory Bennett. Through the glass walls, they could see his gestures becoming more agitated. Malcolm's phone buzzed with a text from the chairman of Transcendent Holdings. "Just got Bennett's panicked call. Backing your play, don't back down." A small smile crossed Malcolm's face as he showed the message to his daughters. And that's why relationships matter. In business, the operations center suddenly erupted with activity as controllers began receiving new instructions. On the main display board, flight statuses began changing from on time to delayed operational review. Raymond emerged from the conference room, his expression a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "Mr. Bennett is flying in from headquarters. He's requested you stay until he arrives to discuss the situation." "I'll be here," Malcolm assured him. "In the meantime, I want to speak with Helena Jackson." Raymond blinked in surprise. "Our diversity officer? Why?" "Because I suspect she's been raising these exact issues without being heard," Malcolm replied. "And I want to see your customer complaint records for the past 5 years, specifically those involving allegations of discriminatory treatment." "That would take hours to compile," Raymond protested. "Then I suggest you get started," Malcolm replied calmly. "Because those planes aren't moving until I see them." As Raymond hurried away, Zoe turned to her father with newfound understanding. "This isn't just about us, is it?" "It never was," Malcolm confirmed. "What happened to you happens every day to people without my resources or connections. The difference is today, it happened to the wrong person's children." On the operations screens, aircraft icons had stopped moving across their digital maps. Throughout terminals across the country, thousands of passengers were about to discover their flights weren't going anywhere. In airport lounges, pilots and flight attendants would soon be checking their phones, confused by the unprecedented nationwide ground stop of a major airline. Malcolm's assistant, Grace, arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by 2 attorneys from their legal team. She handed Malcolm a tablet with real-time social media monitoring. "It's starting to trend," she informed him. Jasmine's video is gaining traction, though Skyline's PR team is trying to control the narrative. As they watched, Helena Jackson arrived clutching a thick binder of documents. The African-American woman in her early 40s had the weary expression of someone who had fought the same battles too many times. "Mr. Washington," she greeted with visible emotion. "I've been documenting these incidents for 3 years. Nobody would listen." "They're listening now," Malcolm assured her, gesturing to a seat at the conference table. "Tell me everything." As Helena began sharing her meticulously documented cases of discrimination throughout Skyline's operation, Malcolm's phone continuously buzzed with notifications. Skyline stock was dropping in after-hours trading. News outlets were speculating about the mysterious operational review. 17,000 passengers across the country were wondering why their flights weren't departing. In the center of the growing storm, Malcolm Washington remained perfectly calm. He had spent his entire career working within systems that weren't designed for people who looked like him. Now, for once, he had the leverage to demand real change, not through persuasion or compromise, but through the only language corporate America truly understood: the bottom line. Dad, Jasmine asked quietly during a brief break, "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here?" Malcolm looked at his daughter, the future engineer, who approached problems with logical precision. Simple. I'm creating a situation where doing the right thing becomes more profitable than continuing to do the wrong thing. Outside, the operations center windows a line of stationary aircraft stretched across the tarmac, their stillness a physical manifestation of Malcolm's resolve. The lessons that would unfold from this moment would indeed cost everything, but not for the Washington family. 6 hours into the unprecedented ground stop, O'Hare International Airport had transformed into a landscape of controlled chaos. The departures board displayed a sea of red, delayed notifications beside every Skyline flight. The terminal concourses teemed with stranded passengers, their confusion evolving into frustration and, in some cases, outright anger. Inside the Skyline Operations Center, the crisis had expanded exponentially. The main Situation Room now included not only Malcolm Washington and his daughters, but also a growing assembly of corporate executives, legal representatives, and crisis management specialists flown in from across the country. On the central display screens, news channels ran continuous coverage of the mysterious airline shutdown. CNN's headline banner read, "Skyline Airlines grounds entire fleet, cause unknown." MSNBC focused on the economic impact. Skyline's stock plummets, 17% AMID operational shutdown. Fox Business took a different angle. Thousands stranded in Skyline's operational review. Corporate sabotage. Gregory Bennett, Skyline CEO, had arrived an hour earlier, his typically polished appearance showing signs of strain after his emergency flight from New York. The 60-year-old executive paced near the window, periodically checking his phone as the company's market value continued to evaporate. $623 million, he announced, to no one in particular reading from his screen. That's how much shareholder value has been lost since this began. Malcolm, reviewing documents with Helena Jackson and his legal team, looked up calmly. "And how much have you lost by ignoring the discrimination happening under your watch?" Bennett's jaw tightened. "Malcolm, I understand you're upset about what happened to your daughters. It was inexcusable, and those responsible will be held accountable. But grounding an entire airline over one isolated incident—" "Stop right there," Malcolm interrupted, sliding a document across the table. "Helena has documented 178 similar incidents in the past 3 years alone. 42 involved the same gate agent who targeted my daughters. Your company received formal complaints in every case." "And what happened?" Malcolm continued, not waiting for a response. "Nothing. No disciplinary action. No policy changes. Just form letters about taking your concerns seriously while burying the evidence." Helena, the diversity officer whose career had been defined by having her warnings ignored, spoke up with newfound confidence. "I've presented these patterns in every quarterly executive meeting for the past 3 years. Each time I was told it wasn't a priority issue or that addressing it would be too resource-intensive." Bennett had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Helena, we've implemented several diversity initiatives during your tenure." Window dressing, she cut in, surprising even herself with her boldness. "Online training modules that nobody completes, and diversity posters in the break room don't address systematic discrimination in daily operations." Jasmine, who had been analyzing the data on her tablet, raised her hand tentatively. When Malcolm nodded, she addressed the room with the composure of someone twice her age. "I've been reviewing the customer satisfaction data Miss Jackson provided," she said, projecting a chart onto the main screen. "When controlling for all other variables, passengers of color consistently report negative experiences at a rate 340% higher than white passengers. The statistical significance is undeniable. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Bennett looked at the teenage girl with a mixture of surprise and discomfort. "And who might you be?" he asked, his tone somewhere between condescending and confused. "Jasmine Washington, mathematician and future engineer," she replied without hesitation. "The data speaks for itself." Before Bennett could respond, the doors opened and William Foster, chairman of Skyline's board, entered the room. The 72-year-old industry veteran commanded immediate attention despite his diminutive stature. His expression was grave as he surveyed the assembled crisis team. "Gregory," a word he said quietly, gesturing to a private corner. Their hushed conversation lasted less than a minute, but Bennett's face visibly paled. When they returned to the table, Foster took command. "Mr. Washington," Foster began, his tone respectful, "this situation has escalated beyond what any of us anticipated. I've just come from an emergency board call. We're prepared to discuss your terms for lifting the ground stop." Malcolm glanced at his daughters, then at Helena, whose years of ignored warnings had led to this moment. "My terms aren't complicated," Malcolm stated. 1. A complete overhaul of your customer service training and protocols with specific attention to eliminating bias. 2. An independent audit of all discrimination complaints for the past 5 years with appropriate compensation to affected passengers. 3. Structural changes to your hiring, promotion, and accountability systems to ensure this doesn't continue. Foster nodded slowly. "Those terms seem reasonable in principle. We'd need to discuss implementation details and timelines." "Those aren't my only terms," Malcolm continued. "Brett Holloway and anyone who enabled his behavior must be held accountable. And Helena Jackson, who tried to prevent all of this, deserves recognition and the authority to implement real change." Bennett began to object, but Foster raised a hand to silence him. "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes. I want my daughters to address your executive team directly," Malcolm said, surprising everyone, including Zoe and Jasmine. "They should hear firsthand how it feels to be humiliated simply because of how you look." Foster considered this unusual request, then nodded. "Agreed." Outside the operations center, the crisis continued to expand in unpredictable ways. Malcolm's assistant, Grace, entered with a tablet displaying social media trends. "Jasmine's video has gone viral," she reported. 17 million views in the past 4 hours. It's being shared by civil rights leaders, celebrities, and politicians on both sides of the aisle. She scrolled to another screen. However, there's also a counter-narrative forming. Some are calling Mr. Washington's response disproportionate and an abuse of corporate power. The hashtag number Skyline Sabotage is trending among those blaming him for the disruption. Zoe, ever attuned to the human dimension, checked her phone and frowned. "Dad, we're getting some disturbing messages." Malcolm checked his daughter's screen to find a stream of hateful comments and even threats directed at his family. His expression hardened, but he maintained his composure. "Forward those to security," he instructed Grace, "and make sure our home system is on alert protocol." The weight of the situation settled over the room. What had begun as a stand against discrimination had evolved into something far more complex, a power struggle with real-world consequences for thousands of uninvolved people, a media firestorm, and now potential security concerns for his family. For the first time since the confrontation began, doubt flickered across Malcolm's face, visible only to his daughters who knew him best. Zoe reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're with you, Dad," she said softly. The moment of vulnerability passed, and Malcolm Washington returned to his negotiating posture, facing the assembled executives with renewed determination. "Now shall we discuss implementation details?" he asked, opening his tablet to a document titled Skyline Reformation Plan, a comprehensive blueprint he and his team had somehow developed in the midst of the crisis. Foster and the other executives exchanged glances that mixed respect with discomfort. They were witnessing something rare in corporate America. Someone with both the power and the will to force institutional change when all other methods had failed. As night fell over Chicago, 47 Skyline aircraft remained motionless on tarmacs across the country, silent testaments to the high stakes of the ongoing negotiations. For the 17,000 stranded passengers, it was an inconvenience. For the airline industry, it was unprecedented. But for Malcolm Washington and his daughters, it was simply necessary, a lesson that would reshape an entire corporate culture, provided they could withstand the growing pressure bearing down upon them. The airport conference room, originally designed for routine operational meetings, had transformed into something resembling a war room by midnight. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across faces, showing the strain of a 12-hour crisis. Coffee cups and hastily ordered food containers littered the tables where Skyline's executive team now sat opposite Malcolm Washington and his growing coalition. William Foster, Skyline's board chairman, studied the revised agreement his legal team had drafted based on the negotiations of the past several hours. His reading glasses perched low on his nose as he flipped through the pages with deliberate care. "This is extensive," he commented, looking up at Malcolm. "Comprehensive," Malcolm corrected. "There's a difference." The document outlined systemic changes that would affect every level of Skyline's operations: new training protocols, revised hiring practices, transparent complaint procedures, regular external audits, and compensation funds for past 5 victims of discrimination. It represented not just a response to a single incident, but a complete overhaul of corporate culture. Gregory Bennett, still struggling to accept the rapidly shifting power dynamics, leaned forward. "While we're committed to improvement, this implementation timeline is simply unrealistic. Some of these changes would take months, if not years." "The timeline is non-negotiable," Malcolm replied evenly. "And to ensure accountability, I'm requiring that the board establish an independent oversight committee with binding authority." Bennett's frustration bubbled over. "This is corporate extortion, Malcolm. You're using your financial leverage to hold an entire airline hostage." The room fell silent. Malcolm studied Bennett for a moment, then made a decision. "I'd like my daughters to address the room now," he said quietly. Zoe and Jasmine exchanged nervous glances, but stood together at the head of the conference table. Throughout the day, they had observed the negotiations with growing understanding of the business world their father navigated daily. Now facing a room of powerful executives, they would contribute their own perspectives. Jasmine spoke first, her analytical mind framing the issue with precision. "Mr. Bennett, you characterized our father's actions as holding an airline hostage." She began, her voice steady despite her youth. "I'd like to reframe that. What you're experiencing, the frustration of having your movement restricted, your authority questioned, and your dignity challenged, is precisely what happened to us at your gate today." She projected a series of data visualizations onto the screen behind her. These charts represent statistical patterns of similar incidents reported by your passengers. Each dot represents someone who experienced what we did but without the resources to make you listen. Zoe stepped forward next, bringing the human element that complemented her sister's data-driven approach. "What happened today wasn't about first-class tickets or boarding procedures," she said, her voice carrying the emotional weight her sister's analytical presentation had set up. "It was about being seen as suspicious by default, about watching others receive courtesy while we received scrutiny." Her voice wavered slightly but didn't break. "Every black child learns early that we'll be judged differently. Our parents teach us coping mechanisms, how to stay calm when falsely accused, how to de-escalate situations we didn't create, how to swallow our pride just to get through the day." Zoe looked directly at Bennett. "Today wasn't the first time we've been discriminated against, Mr. Bennett. It was just the first time someone could do something about it, beyond filing a complaint that would be ignored." The room remained silent as her words sank in. Even the most resistant executives seemed affected by hearing directly from the teenage girls at the center of the crisis. William Foster removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I believe I understand your perspective better now," he said quietly. "Thank you for your candor." Helena Jackson, who had been relatively quiet during the negotiations, spoke up. "For 3 years, I've been presenting reports filled with similar experiences. The difference is that these young women are being heard." She slid a folder across the table. "This contains every diversity initiative I've proposed that was rejected due to budget constraints or lack of strategic alignment. Each one would have addressed the exact issues that led to today's ever-teacher situation." Foster examined the folder's contents, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "I've never seen these proposals." "They never made it past middle management," Helena confirmed. "I was told they weren't board priorities." Foster looked at Bennett, who avoided his gaze. The turning point came not from Malcolm or his daughters, but from an unexpected source. Raymond Shaw, the regional director who had initially tried to minimize the incident, cleared his throat. "I need to say something," he announced, his voice strained. "When this began, I saw it as an overreaction to an isolated incident. But after reviewing Miss Jackson's documentation and hearing these young women speak," he paused, visibly uncomfortable, "I realized I've been part of the problem. I've dismissed similar complaints as passengers being difficult or overreacting. I never connected the dots because I didn't want to see the pattern." The admission from a senior executive shifted the energy in the room. Others began nodding, some even sharing their own realizations about witnessed incidents they had rationalized away. William Foster turned to Malcolm. "It seems we have more work to do than I initially realized. I accept your terms, including the timeline." He extended his hand across the table. "We'll need your help implementing these changes effectively." Malcolm shook the offered hand. "You'll have it, and more importantly, you'll have Helena's expertise, which you've been ignoring for years." Foster nodded, then turned to Helena. "Miss Jackson, I'd like you to join the executive leadership team effective immediately. We need your voice at the highest level of decision-making." Helena's surprise gave way to cautious optimism. "I have 3 years of implementation plans ready to go." Bennett, recognizing the shifting landscape, attempted to salvage his position. "We should prepare a joint statement about our collaboration on these new initiatives." "This isn't about positive PR," Malcolm replied firmly. "It's about structural change. The statement needs to acknowledge the problem honestly before outlining the solutions." Foster overruled Bennett's objection with a nod. "Agreed. Transparency will be essential to rebuilding trust." As the meeting continued into the early morning hours, the framework for resolving the crisis took shape. Plans were made to resume operations, gradually beginning with flights stranded overnight. A comprehensive communication strategy was developed to explain the unprecedented shutdown to the public and the company's shareholders. Malcolm's phone buzzed with a message from his wife Naomi, who had been following the situation remotely while completing her surgical duties. "The girl's okay, you?" He replied simply, "Making progress. We're all fine. Love you." By dawn, the conference room windows revealed aircraft finally beginning to move across the tarmac. The airline was coming back to life, but it would never be the same. The systems that had allowed discrimination to flourish unaddressed were being dismantled, replaced by structures designed to ensure equity and accountability. As morning light filled the room, Malcolm watched his daughters, exhausted but resolute, discussing implementation details with Helena. In their faces, he saw not just his own reflection, but the future they were helping to shape. One where standing up against injustice wasn't just a personal victory, but a catalyst for systemic change. The turning point had come not through Malcolm's financial leverage alone, but through the powerful combination of data, personal testimony, and the courage to demand that institutions live up to their stated values. In that airport conference room, a new blueprint was emerging, not just for an airline, but for how corporate America might respond when confronted with its failures to deliver true equality. The morning sun cast long shadows across O'Hare International Airport as Skyline's operations gradually resumed. In Terminal 3, gate agents delivered a carefully scripted announcement to waiting passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, Skyline Airlines appreciates your patience during our recent operational review. We are now resuming normal service. As a gesture of goodwill, all passengers will receive travel vouchers and additional loyalty points. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your understanding. What the announcement didn't mention was the unprecedented corporate transformation unfolding behind the scenes. In a secure broadcast studio within Skyline's headquarters, Malcolm Washington stood before a camera addressing the company's 17,000 employees directly through an emergency broadcast. "My name is Malcolm Washington," he began, his tone measured yet authoritative. "Many of you may be wondering why your airline ceased operations for nearly 18 hours. Some of you have heard rumors about an incident involving my family. Today, I want to share the complete truth with you directly." Malcolm proceeded to explain the events that had triggered the shutdown, neither sensationalizing nor downplaying what had occurred. He shared select clips from Jasmine's recording, along with data revealing the pattern of similar incidents throughout the airline's history. "This wasn't about one bad employee or one isolated experience," he continued. "It was about systems that allowed discrimination to continue, unchallenged, about complaints that were filed, and ignored about a corporate culture that prioritized efficiency over equity." The broadcast cut to William Foster, who outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented effective immediately. "Brett Holloway and Veronica Winters have been terminated following our investigation," Foster announced solemnly. "But more importantly, we're addressing the environment that enabled their behavior. Beginning today, all customer-facing staff will undergo mandatory anti-bias training developed by external specialists. We're establishing an independent review board for discrimination complaints. And we're promoting Helena Jackson to our executive leadership team as Chief Inclusion Officer with direct reporting authority to the board." As the broadcast continued detailing additional structural changes, the first Skyline flights began taking off across the country. The airline was coming back online, but not without significant turbulence in public perception. In the executive suite, temporarily allocated to Malcolm and his team, his assistant Grace provided a social media update. "It's intensely polarized," she reported, displaying a dashboard of trending topics. Hashtags like #Skyline Accountability and #Corporate Responsibility are gaining traction among civil rights advocates and business ethics groups. She scrolled to another screen. "But there's significant backlash too. #Boycott Washington and #Entitled Executive are trending among people blaming you for the disruption. Some passengers are filing class action lawsuits over missed connections and events." Malcolm nodded, having anticipated the divided reaction. "What's the business community saying?" Grace pulled up industry publications and financial news. "Mixed. Some are calling it an overreaction and dangerous precedent. Others are praising it as long overdue accountability. Your company stock is down 7%, but interestingly, Skyline's parent company is only down 3%. Analysts suggest the market sees the reforms as potentially positive for long-term value." Zoe, who had been monitoring her phone, looked up with concern. "Dad, we're getting some disturbing messages." Malcolm reviewed the screen his daughter held out, his expression darkening as he scrolled through a stream of racist comments, threats, and doxing attempts targeting his family. "Forward these to our security team," he instructed calmly, though the tension in his jaw revealed his underlying anger. "Have them coordinate with local police for additional patrols near our home." The door opened, and Naomi Washington entered, still wearing surgical scrubs from her overnight emergency operation. She embraced her daughters tightly before turning to her husband. "I saw the broadcast," she said, her voice a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you all right?" "We're managing, Malcolm," replied the simple phrase, carrying the weight of their shared understanding of what it meant to take a stand. Naomi scrolled through her own phone. "The medical community is buzzing about this. Half my colleagues think you're a hero for using your position to force accountability. The other half think you abused your power and inconvenienced thousands of innocent people." "What do you think?" Malcolm asked quietly. Naomi considered the question carefully. "I think sometimes the medicine that heals is initially painful. As a surgeon, I know that better than most." Their conversation was interrupted by news that Gregory Bennett was holding an unauthorized press conference attempting to reshape the narrative. On the nearby monitor, Bennett faced a crowd of reporters. While Skyline acknowledges that the incident involving the Washington family was regrettable, the response was disproportionate and has caused unnecessary hardship for thousands of travelers, Bennett stated clearly, attempting to distance himself from the agreed-upon messaging strategy. Malcolm watched silently, making notes rather than reacting emotionally. This suggests a concerning trend of corporate executives using personal leverage to force policy changes that should be developed through proper channels and stakeholder input. Bennett continued building his counter-narrative. The press conference was abruptly cut short when William Foster stepped into frame, whispered something to Bennett, and then took over the microphone. "Skyline Airlines apologizes for the unauthorized comments just made," Foster stated firmly. "They do not reflect our official position or the agreements reached with the Washington family. Mr. Bennett has been placed on administrative leave, pending board review." Grace whistled low. "That's a power move." Malcolm nodded. Foster understands what Bennett doesn't. This isn't going away with spin, real change or nothing. Throughout the day, the implementation process continued, alongside the public controversy. Helena Jackson, now elevated to the executive team, worked with Malcolm to establish immediate changes in gate protocols. Training specialists were flown in to conduct emergency sessions with customer-facing staff. An independent review board began examining past discrimination complaints. By early afternoon, Malcolm's private jet was prepared to take his family to New York, where the girls' Columbia University visit awaited. And Malcolm had rescheduled his investor meetings. As they prepared to depart, an administrative assistant arrived with an envelope. "Mr. Washington, this was just delivered by courier." Inside was a legal notice. Brett Holloway was filing a wrongful termination lawsuit, claiming he had been scapegoated for following company protocols and subjected to reverse discrimination. Malcolm handed the notice to his legal team without comment. The battle was far from over, but the war for institutional change had definitively begun. On the tarmac, representatives from Columbia University waited to escort them from the private aviation terminal, a courtesy arranged after the university president had personally called to express support following news coverage of the incident. Inside the jet, as they prepared for takeoff, Jasmine turned to her father. "Do you regret it? Taking such a public stand?" Malcolm looked out the window at the Skyline aircraft, now moving across the runways, each one representing the system he had forced to pause and reconsider. "No," he said finally, "but I'm not naive about the cost. My board is divided on whether my actions were appropriate. Some investors are threatening to pull out, and our family will face scrutiny and threats for the foreseeable future." "Then why do it?" Zoe asked, though her expression suggested she already understood. "Because someday," Malcolm replied, "when you both hold positions of influence, I want you to remember that power unexercised in the face of injustice is power wasted. And sometimes, the most important changes happen only when someone with leverage refuses to accept the unacceptable." As their jet took off, Malcolm received a message from William Foster Board unanimously approved all reforms. "Helena, presenting implementation timeline tomorrow. Thank you for forcing us to be better." Alongside this message was a news alert. Skyline had announced the creation of an industry-leading anti-discrimination initiative already being dubbed the Washington Protocols by industry analysts. Malcolm showed the message to his family, a small smile finally breaking through his serious demeanor. That, he said quietly, is how change begins. 3 weeks after the Skyline incident, Malcolm Washington sat before the Transportation Committee of the United States Congress, adjusting his microphone as cameras flashed throughout the chamber. The hearing, titled Discrimination in Transportation: Systemic Issues and Potential Solutions, had been called in response to the national conversation sparked by the Skyline shutdown. Mr. Washington began. Congresswoman Eleanor Richardson, the committee chairwoman, could you explain to the committee why you felt it necessary to ground an entire airline fleet rather than pursuing more conventional channels for addressing your concerns? Malcolm leaned into the microphone, his composed demeanor contrasting with the gravity of his words. Conventional channels had already failed, Congresswoman. Not just for my family, but for hundreds of others who filed complaints that were systematically ignored. What made our situation unique wasn't the discrimination itself. It was that I had the leverage to demand accountability. He gestured to a thick binder of documents. I've provided this committee with 3 years of documented discrimination complaints filed with Skyline Airlines before our incident. Out of 217 formal complaints, only 4 resulted in any action. The conventional channels were broken by design. The congressional hearing represented just one facet of the wide-reaching aftermath of Malcolm's stand against Skyline. In the 3 weeks since the incident, the ripple effects had touched virtually every aspect of the Washington family's life and transformed an entire industry's approach to discrimination. Miles away from Capitol Hill and Skyline's corporate headquarters, Helena Jackson presided over the 8th consecutive day of intensive anti-bias training for the airline's leadership team. The previously ignored diversity officer now commanded the respect of executives who had once dismissed her recommendations. The Washington Protocols aren't just about avoiding lawsuits, she explained to the assembled directors and managers. They're about fundamentally changing how we see our passengers and our responsibility to them. On a screen behind her, statistics illustrated the financial impact of the reform's initial implementation costs of $11 million, but projected long-term savings of $37 million annually through reduced complaints, litigation, and improved customer loyalty. Doing the right thing is becoming good business. Helena noted a point that resonated even with the most profit-focused executives. At Westlake Preparatory Academy, Zoe and Jasmine Washington navigated a different kind of aftermath. Their return to school had transformed them from ordinary high-achieving students to reluctant symbols of resistance. Some classmates treated them as celebrities, others with resentment for the attention they'd received. People keep asking me to record TikToks about standing up to the man, Jasmine confided to her sister during lunch. They don't understand this wasn't about going viral. Zoe nodded, picking at her salad. Mrs. Hoffman asked me to speak at assembly about our empowering experience, as if being discriminated against was some kind of character-building exercise. At least most people have been supportive, Jasmine acknowledged. Remember what Dad said about the hate mail being from the loud minority. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their friend Danielle, who slid a large envelope across the table. This came to the office for you. Special delivery. The twins exchanged curious glances before opening the envelope to reveal 2 formal letters bearing Columbia University's insignia. They read in stunned silence, then looked up at each other with identical expressions of disbelief. We both got early acceptance, Zoe whispered. Full scholarship. Is it because of what happened? Jasmine wondered aloud, conflicted, about the possibility their admission might be connected to their sudden notoriety. Before they could discuss further, their phones buzzed simultaneously with messages from their father. Proud of you both. You earned this long before Skyline. We'll celebrate tonight. Across town at Genesis Technologies headquarters, Malcolm faced his own professional consequences. The company's board of directors remained divided on his actions, with some directors arguing he had exposed the company to unnecessary risk and negative publicity. The quarterly numbers speak for themselves, argued board member Victor Harrington, gesturing to the financial projections displayed in the boardroom. Our stock is down 12% since the incident. Some major clients are concerned about your judgment, Malcolm. Some clients, Malcolm corrected. Others have increased their business with us specifically because they respect our ethical stand. The McKinsey Foundation doubled their technology infrastructure contract last week. Board Chair Diana Sullivan mediated the tense exchange. No one questions Malcolm's right to defend his family. The issue is whether using company resources and leveraging his position as our CEO was appropriate. Malcolm remained unfazed by the scrutiny. I didn't use company resources. I used my personal influence as a board member of Transcendent Holdings, and I'd do it again. The boardroom debate reflected broader conversations happening throughout corporate America, where executives were reassessing their own vulnerability to similar accountability actions. Industry publications had run headlines like, "The Washington Effect, when executives use personal power for social change," and "Corporate activism or abuse of power. The Skyline debate continues." Meanwhile, Brett Holloway's wrongful termination lawsuit progressed through preliminary hearings, becoming a rallying point for those who viewed the Skyline reforms as overcorrection or reverse discrimination. His attorney appeared regularly on certain news networks, framing Holloway as a scapegoat who was simply following procedures. The most meaningful development, however, was happening quietly at the Washington family's dining room table, where Malcolm and Naomi had established the Washington Family Foundation with an initial endowment of $10 million. The foundation will provide legal assistance and advocacy for discrimination victims without the resources to fight back, Malcolm explained to his daughters as they reviewed the foundation's charter. "We're partnering with civil rights organizations to identify cases where intervention could create precedent-setting change." Naomi, who had taken a leadership role in the foundation alongside her surgical practice, added, "We've already identified 3 cases involving transportation discrimination that mirror what happened to you, but where the victims lacked leverage to demand accountability." The twins exchanged glances, then Zoe spoke up. "We want to be involved too, not just as your daughters, but as board members with actual responsibilities." "You'll need to balance that with your studies," Naomi cautioned. "Like you balance surgery with everything else?" Jasmine countered with a smile. "We're Washington women. Multitasking is in our DNA." The family's discussion was interrupted by breaking news on the television in the adjacent room. They gathered around the screen to see William Foster, now firmly established as Skyline's leader following Gregory Bennett's resignation, announcing the airline's latest quarterly results. Despite initial market concerns, Skyline's implementation of the Washington protocols has resulted in a 27% decrease in customer complaints and a 12% increase in customer satisfaction scores. Foster reported to assembled financial analysts, "Our internal metrics show improved employee morale and retention, particularly among our diverse staff members." The news continued with footage of newly trained Skyline staff interacting with passengers, including scenes from the company's completely redesigned customer service training program that now served as an industry model. Later that evening, as Malcolm prepared for bed, he paused by the window of his home office, watching planes taking off and landing at the distant airport. The rhythm of their lights against the night sky reminded him of the fleet he had grounded 3 weeks earlier, a decisive moment that continued to reverberate through their lives and beyond. Naomi joined him at the window, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Penny, for your thoughts." Malcolm considered the question carefully. "I'm thinking about power. About how it's not just what you can do with it, but what you're willing to do with it that matters." "And the cost?" she asked softly. "Always worth paying when the cause is just," he replied without hesitation. "But I won't pretend it's been easy on any of us." The cost had indeed been substantial. Their family had received death threats serious enough to warrant increased security. Malcolm's professional reputation had become polarized hero to some, villain to others. Their previous privacy had been replaced by public scrutiny and occasional paparazzi photos. Yet alongside these challenges had come extraordinary impact. Transportation companies across the country were proactively reviewing their discrimination policies. Corporate boards were discussing accountability mechanisms. Most importantly, people without Malcolm's resources were finding new allies in their fights against systemic discrimination. A soft knock at the door interrupted their moment of reflection. Jasmine and Zoe entered carrying their Columbia acceptance letters. "Dad," Zoe began, "we've been thinking about our application essays. Both of us wrote about wanting to create positive change in the world," Jasmine continued, "but we never imagined what that might actually look like or cost." Malcolm turned from the window to face his daughters. "And now, we understand," Zoe said simply. "You showed us that change doesn't come from wishing or waiting. It comes from leverage and action, even when it's uncomfortable." "Especially when it's uncomfortable," Jasmine added. Malcolm looked at his family, his brilliant surgeon wife, who saved lives daily. His daughters already showing the strength and wisdom that would make them formidable women, and felt a profound sense of purpose reaffirmed. "The most important lessons aren't taught in boardrooms or classrooms," he said finally. "They're taught when principles meet reality, when we're forced to decide who we really are and what we're willing to sacrifice for what's right." As news continued to report on the Washington effect spreading through corporate America, Malcolm knew that what had begun as a father protecting his daughters had evolved into something more significant, a demonstration that systems presumed too big to change could indeed be transformed when someone with power refused to accept the status quo. On his desk lay a handwritten note he'd received that morning from a flight attendant at Skyline. "Thank you for grounding the planes so we could finally be seen and heard. Some lessons do cost everything, but the alternative costs even more." This powerful story reminds us that true change often requires more than following established procedures. When systems are designed to minimize accountability rather than deliver justice, sometimes disruption becomes necessary. Malcolm Washington demonstrated that privilege and power carry responsibility, not just to succeed individually, but to create pathways for others. The Washington family's experience highlights how discrimination persists even for those with resources and status. For Black Americans, success doesn't eliminate bias. It simply changes how it manifests. What made Malcolm exceptional wasn't experiencing discrimination, but having the leverage to demand systemic change. Helena Jackson's ignored warnings reveal another crucial lesson. Organizations often have internal advocates fighting for equity, but they're frequently sidelined until crisis forces action. Real inclusion means empowering these voices before problems escalate. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us that institutional change rarely happens through incremental steps. Transformative moments require bold action that makes the cost of continuing harmful practices higher than the cost of reform. As Malcolm understood, sometimes lessons cost everything, but refusing to teach those lessons costs even more. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to stop it? Or have you seen someone use their position to create positive change? Share your experiences in the comments below. If Malcolm's stand against injustice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming racial barriers. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs inspiration to speak up against unfair treatment. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters in creating a more equitable world for everyone.